Well, welcome back, everyone. I know the big question on your mind is the notification by the Secretary of the Treasury of the need to raise the debt ceiling. This is the beginning of the discussion that always occurs in the past, probably leading to some decision this summer. And you're probably wondering what role, if any, the Senate would play in this. As some of you recall, I've been through a few of these debt ceiling situations. The one that seems to stand out the most was in 2011 when I negotiated with then Vice President Joe Biden the Budget Control Act in conjunction with raising the debt ceiling. It actually worked. It reduced government spending for 2 years in a row for the first time since right after the Korean War. However, over the years, most of us on our side felt it was squeezing defense unrealistically. Democrats felt the same way on the domestic side, and we gradually pulled away from us. But if you were genuinely interested in cutting spending, it actually worked. At that time, the federal debt was about $12 trillion. It's now $31 trillion. In the course of the last Congress, the Democrats, without a single Republican vote, racked up another $2.7 trillion on top of what had happened during the pandemic. So here's where I think we are. I can't imagine any kind of debt ceiling measure that could pass the Senate would also pass the House. So even though the debt ceiling could originate in either the House or the Senate, in this current situation, the debt ceiling fix, if there is one, or how it's to be dealt with, will have to come out of the House. So I think it's entirely reasonable for the new Speaker and his team to put spending reduction on the table. I wish him well in talking to the President. That's where a solution lies. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, I can't imagine any debt ceiling provision passed out of the Senate with 60 votes could actually pass this particular House. So I think the final solution to this particular episode lies between Speaker McCarthy and the President.
Last Friday marked 2 years since President Biden was sworn into office, and I think, without question, one of the biggest failures in his first 2 years in office is the absolute disaster we have at our southern border. If you look at the data, statistics, the numbers tell the story. December was the largest month, single month, largest number of people who were apprehended trying to, or I should say, who attempted illegal border crossings, and that was over 250,000 people. The number of gotaways is now 1.2 million people, and the last 3 months has averaged 70,000 per month. So the numbers continue to just get worse. The president finally took a trip to the southern border, and obviously what we're anxious to see now is what he learned on his trip, and is he actually going to do something? Because talking about it is one thing, but actually doing something to address this crisis is I think what the American people are looking for, and that's a solution. And there are lots of things he could do. I mean, starting with just enforcing the law. That would be a very simple place to start. He could reinstate a Remain in Mexico policy. He could quit trying to do away with the Title 42 policy that has given our Border Patrol agents at least some wherewithal in order to stop people who are trying to come here illegally. He could end catch and release. And he could finish building the wall. There are a whole series of solutions, many of which are very obvious to, I think, a lot of people, that the President and his administration so far at least have been unwilling to entertain. But this is a disaster. It is a humanitarian disaster. It is a law enforcement disaster. It is a national security crisis. If you look at the number of people, not only the number, but the types of people who are now coming across our southern border. It's a solution which cries out, or a problem which cries out for a solution. And this administration, as I've said before, has been entirely missing in action, and it is high time that they engaged and tried to fix this problem. And those are a number of solutions that I think would work.
Well, yesterday, the President had his Secretary of Low Energy, Jennifer Granholm, make an announcement and a veto threat from the podium at the White House. It has to do with legislation that the House is about to pass that has to do with our emergency energy supply, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And it says if we withdraw more, we need a plan for exploration of energy in the United States to refill that. I've introduced similar legislation in the Senate. The reason this is so important is because our emergency supplies are now at a 40-year low. And we've gotten to that point because President Biden, in the run-up to the elections, withdrew from our strategic reserve 1 million barrels of oil each and every day for 6 months, 180 days, 180 million barrels of oil. And he started doing it when energy prices, gasoline was at $5 a gallon. People were feeling the pain at the pump. It's nice to see that the President finally admits that there is a relationship between supply and demand and the cost of energy and gasoline at the pump. But yet the President continues to respond to the climate crazies who call the tune at the White House, which is why they killed the Keystone XL pipeline and why he continues to hammer on oil and gas exploration in America. Well, the price of gasoline is going up again. The American people know what they want. They want energy that is affordable, available, and reliable. They want it from here at home. They don't want us going to Iran or begging Saudi Arabia or Venezuela for oil and energy. But yet this war on energy by President Biden has hurt our energy grid and has hurt our energy security. And you don't have to think back very far to see it. Look at what happened at Christmas time with the cold snap that hit the country. People across the country were told to lower their thermostat, turn off their Christmas lights, and don't plug in your electric vehicle because it was going to lead to brownouts or blackouts. And I'm not sure if the President or his sidekick, Secretary of Energy, even knows the fact that Vladimir Putin continues to subsidize the climate-crazy group of lobbyists and others who represent organizations that continue to lobby in this country against American energy. Putin has spent lots of money over a decade on this. These are the people that argue against pipelines, against energy infrastructure, against oil and gas exploration. In the meantime, my home state of Wyoming, energy breadbasket of America, is told we have to keep our affordable, available, and reliable energy in the ground. What's the President say he wants to do? Well, you heard the administration talking about banning gas stoves, and the President made a promise to the United Nations to send $11 billion each and every year to the UN for climate reparations. I am going to do absolutely everything I can as the ranking member of the Energy Committee in the Senate to make sure that the United States never, ever delivers on Joe Biden's promises.
Well, it is great to be here in our new Congress, and we do have a couple new leaders with us as we are coming forward today. I want to welcome my friend Shelley Moore Capito as our vice chair, and we have Senator Steve Daines as well joining us as the chair of the NRSC. So exciting times, a lot of changes coming forward. But folks, the last 3 weeks, I've had some great quality time in the state of Iowa, and I have continued on visiting my counties. I was able to visit 33 different counties doing roundtables with farmers and those engaged in agriculture as we prepare for the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill reauthorization. I was able to meet with school groups, and I did a number of open public town halls, hearing from Iowans about all different topics. And what I find that is consistent with all of those meetings, all of those discussions, Iowans are really concerned about what's going on with this administration. The things that I heard about, number one, economy and inflation, and how it's hurting our farmers, our families, and our small businesses. I heard from students about their concerns with public education. Heard from those farmers as we did those roundtables about excessive government regulation, things like the new Biden-era Waters of the U.S. rule. So Iowans are feeling the pressure from this administration. They're very concerned about the direction that this administration is going. My commitment to those Iowans, I will continue to work hard for them and represent their voice here in Washington, D.C. as I make my way literally river to river in Iowa, or as we call it in Iowa, coast to coast, the Mississippi to the Missouri. So anyway, folks, it's good to be back in session, but we need to encourage the Democrats, get your act together, let's do right for the American people.
It's nice to be here as part of the leadership team, and I'm happy to be with all of you. I'm going to piggyback on what our leader, our whip said, Senator Thune, on illegal immigration. We saw the number, over 250,000 came through or were apprehended in the month of December, the most ever. But you know, there's a whole other aspect of this, not just the human aspect, the human trafficking and the getaways. There's the drug, deadly drug of fentanyl, which is streaming across our southern border in record amounts. It's not just coming through Texas, it's coming through Arizona and California in larger amounts than we've ever seen. It is the #1 killer for our people in America from the ages of 18 to 45. I know personally, in my state of West Virginia and in my small town, I know some of the folks who've lost their lives, who've lost their sons and daughters, who've lost their classmates, who've lost their very good friends from many, many years. And it's a human tragedy that because the administration has had 2 years to tighten the border, to put more controls, to find out who's coming, how they're coming, and where they're coming from, because we've had to divert resources over to have all of these folks interdicted as they're coming across our border because there's been no deterrence. All of these drugs are coming through and killing our fellow citizens. We are in the cartels in Mexico are being heavily enriched by this, the tune of billions of dollars, but it's not just Mexican cartels. It's the Chinese cartels, it's worldwide crime units that are enriching themselves on the backs of our folks here in this country who are subjected to the flow of fentanyl. So we've got to, I just had a meeting with the DEA director. She is very concerned about this. She's trying to find different solutions to this. But if we see what's going on the border in terms of trying to disrupt the human flow, it is having a negative impact on our ability to interdict the flow of deadly fentanyl into this country.
Well, I'm glad to join the leadership team and join you all today for the stakeout. I want to speak for a few moments about what Senator Capito was also talking about, and that's what's going on the southern border. Now, why would a senator from Montana, when you talk about being a border state, we're a border state with Canada, but Montana is a northern border state with a southern border crisis. It is fentanyl. It is fentanyl that's destroying our communities and creating lawlessness and record levels of crime and record levels of death in Montana, and this fentanyl is coming directly from the Mexican cartels. Sadly, the Biden administration is not doing anything to control the southern border. It is a solvable problem, as Senator Thune laid out, the pieces of what we need to do going forward. But the reality is, if we look in Montana, our fentanyl deaths last year were up 1,100% versus 2017. It's the leading cause of death for young people in our country. You look at seizures of fentanyl by our law enforcement in Montana. More fentanyl was seized by law enforcement in Montana in the first 3 quarters of 2022. We're still waiting for the fourth quarter report than the prior 4 years combined. And lastly, when you take a look at who we saw come across the southern border that we know of in December at our all-time record level, up 40% year over year, there were 17 names that popped on the terror watch list. So the southern border is a humanitarian crisis. It's also a crime crisis, and it's a deadly crisis affecting states like Montana.
Leader McConnell, well, what is your level of concern about classified records showing up at Joe Biden's home? And now we're learning about what happened to Mike Pence. And what specifically should Congress do to prevent this from happening again?
Well, with regard to how the Justice Department handles it, I think they ought to treat everybody the same who has misplaced classified documents. And it seems so far as if the Attorney General is making an effort to do that. And beyond treating everybody the same, I don't really have any additional advice.
Should Congress act here?
So do you think that this sort of hardline negotiation tactic that House Republicans are using with regards to the debt limit is necessary in order to get the debt under control?
Do I think what?
Do you think that sort of hardline negotiation tactic that some House Republicans are trying to use to force negotiation by holding the debt limit in question, do you think that's needed in order to?
Well, as I said earlier, I think if this isn't a good time to talk about the debt, I don't know when that is. And the debt ceiling does provide an opportunity to enter into a discussion about what Admiral Mullen said years ago when asked what was our biggest national security threat. He said it was the debt, and it's only gotten worse. Now, during the pandemic, there was broad agreement on a bipartisan basis that we had to do what we did. As the pandemic ended and we began to go back to normal, not a single Republican supported either of the 2 reconciliation proposals last year that added about $2.7 trillion to the spending spree. This is a good time to talk about it, to try to get an outcome. But the second part of what I said was, I can't imagine any debt ceiling agreement that would get 60 votes in the Senate that would have any chance of passing the House. So the solution to this problem needs to be negotiated between the Speaker and the President.
Leader McConnell, do you think President Biden's possession of classified documents at his home in Washington office could rise to the level of an impeachable offense?
I don't have an answer to that hypothetical. I do think the Justice Department seems to be willing to treat everybody the same and to try to retrieve the documents. And obviously, it's not a great idea to take classified documents away from the archives, and we'll see how they continue to handle it. Yeah.
So some of the documents found at President Biden's home date back to his time in the Senate. You've obviously been around the Senate for a good amount of time. So has the process for handling classified documents as a senator changed over time in your view?
I never knew it was possible to take classified documents out of the SCIF. So most of us don't think there's any way of getting it out of the SCIF, much less bringing it to your office or taking it home.
Do you want Senator Sinema to run for re-election as an independent?
Look, Senator Sinema has been an important part of the United States Senate. The most important thing she did was to save the institution itself by protecting the filibuster. She's also been a significant part of the bipartisan agreements that have been reached in the Senate. As to whether or not she chooses to run again, it's really her decision. And I think it is a big dilemma for the Senate Democratic majority to decide whether to support her or to support somebody running on the Democratic ticket. And I'm pretty sure you were asking a bunch of questions along those lines right before we came out here. I look forward to reading what answers, if any, you got.
Leader McConnell, should